Hey, my name's Ian Begley. You're watching the NBA Exchange with Dexter Henry.
Welcome, everybody, to the NBA Exchange. Happy Good Friday. We are a day away, less than a day away. Well, about just over 24 hours away till the start of the NBA playoffs. We still have some games in the play-in tournament to go through tonight. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today, but I wanted this episode to be particularly focused on betting. We're going to talk a lot about how you bet around the NBA, what you should do in terms of looking at these first round matchups, what might be some good value, whether you're going to bet series or individual games. So I wanted to do that. Now, with me to talk about that is somebody I've known for a long time. I've watched him rise up in the sports journalism industry. It's my man, Kenny Ducey. He's a betting analyst for NBC Sports Edge, the Action Network, and Boardroom. Kenny joins me now on the Exchange. Kenny, what's up, man?
It's good to see you again, Dex. It's been a long time. I think we've known each other since I was about 18. So
Yep.
that's like 10 or 11 years. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, man. I know, for people who don't know, I know Kenny going back to his days at Fordham University. He was grinding, getting into the sports broadcasting scene. He was always working hard. So I'm really glad to see his success, man. Everything you're doing with sports betting, I think is fantastic. All the outlets you're working for and doing stuff for yourself. So keep it up, man. I'm loving what you're doing. That's why I had to have you on for this, because I was like, you're now a sports betting guru, Kenny. I got to put you in that realm. You're a sports betting guru. So I want to ask you this to start off. People always talk about, well, what makes somebody a good bettor? What makes somebody a good sports betting analyst? What is the key things you think people need to know, or in terms of being a good bettor when it comes to sports, whether it's the NBA or anything? What makes somebody a good sports bettor?
So, we're going to use the word value here, right? I think that was one of your questions on value on an NBA playoff series. And value is a word that's always thrown around, right? Everyone always says, oh, where's the value here? Where's the value here? And I think it's important to understand what that word means and understand how it relates to sports betting. So basically, handicapping is sort of another interchangeable word these days for someone who, breaks down sports betting, a sports betting analyst. And really what that is you have to go through the matchups. You have to go through the strengths and weaknesses of both teams. In basketball, for example, rebounding battle, or this team has had issues defending the point guard, vice versa. So in those scenarios, you have to sort of figure out, okay, how many points would you spot this team? What number would you make this team on the money line? And then you weigh that against the market. You weigh that against the way that the public has bet this game and how the market's corrected. And you can identify value that way. So value is just basically, hey, this team is, minus 160 to win tonight. I'd probably make them minus 200. If you see a significant gap like that, you have to take that number. That's what you're doing. So that is what it is. That is, in theory, what sports betting is, what sports handicapping is you have to go through and you have to figure out ways that you can, be a plus-eve bettor. So you have to figure, okay, well, there is value here. This guy is too long of an underdog. And then you take those numbers, and if you are good at it, then eventually over time you make money. And it's a very, very long grind in the business. We always say it's a marathon, not a sprint, because you're going to have your bad days, your bad weeks. But again, if you can identify that value consistently over time, you're going to make money. And another thing is just getting out in front of it, right? The Hawks today, they're 2-point favorites. They were 2-point underdogs at open. So always identifying those lines early as well, identifying those the lines that are off, and getting in early, and then what we call closing line value. You get a 4-point swing, and you get the right number. So getting the right number, identifying where there might be a little bit of a discrepancy in the odds. And that's how you are a good sports bettor and a good sports handicapper.
We always talk a little bit about sports betting on this show, particularly around the NBA. One of the things I always try to encourage people sometimes too, you talked about value, is I think a lot of times people go for, the odds they see at the game. So Hawks -2 tonight, right? And it's minus 110 in terms of the odds, but maybe a little bit in a situation where the odds are higher. How do you see a lot of people that are willing to adjust those odds, look for the value, maybe go to an alternative spread? I do that a lot sometimes. Maybe I don't like the line here. Let me shift that. Is that something people should be doing when they're looking in terms of value for betting on these games?
Honestly, it's not something, and it's different with every sport. And I think that, in basketball and football in particular, two very popular sports to bet, it's not a recommended strategy because generally speaking, the sports books are very sharp on these lines. And it is fun sometimes to go out and play one. If you feel really, really confident about the Hawks, for example, playing a -7 or a -8 alt spread, you'd obviously stake that lower than you would just a normal bet on what the spread is. But we've seen, especially in the playoffs, and that's another thing to remember. If we're talking about the regular season, it's maybe a late February game, March game, not a very highly bet game. Maybe it's like, I don't know, Grizzlies Pistons or something. Yeah, maybe you could take a shot there. But I think in general, when we get down to the playoffs, these lines are pretty sharp. They're not moving too much. So you definitely don't want to go too crazy with alt spreads. But yes, I do know that especially in the prop market, it actually can be quite fruitful to do some alternative numbers if you think that Kevin Huerter is going to go off. You can take his over was 2.5 threes last night. He only hit 3 threes, or 2 nights ago rather. But I see sometimes my colleagues will take ladders, so they'll say, okay, over 2.5 threes, over 3.5 threes, or 4.5 threes. And you can definitely make a lot of money that way as well. If you can identify a guy that's about to go off and have a good night, you can kind of escalate those prop markets.
Is there, and the other question I want to ask you that, is there better when it comes to the playoffs? Because you talked about how the lines are, more strict. You don't see much variation in the lines here in the postseason. Is it better to bet on individual games or playoff series when it comes to playoff betting with the NBA?
I think it all depends. I think and we can get into it, but it's sort of series by series, right? So if you can identify, okay, well, the Dallas Mavericks, I think the Dallas Mavericks are going to win this series, but Luka Doncic, obviously out for game 1. I want to wait until the Mavericks lose, get the better price. You have to play the market like that sometimes. So I think it just really all depends. I think there can be plenty of value betting game to game. There also are certain scenarios where the series market's maybe more attractive after game 1. If you can sort of, wait out where the prices are going to come. I mean, there's a lot of people happening on the Raptors right now. The Raptors are a very popular underdog pick to win this series against the Sixers, given the way that Phillies ended the season and James Harden sort of, struggling to fit in with that offense after such a great start. So, there are scenarios like that where you might want to hop on the Raptors now before that upset game 1 win. Or, maybe you want to wait if you anticipate it and then take the Sixers at, even money or something like that. So it's the series markets are definitely very fun to play, but they're much different, right? You sort of, you almost want to wait until after game 1 or after game 2 and then hop in because you can get some pretty enticing odds on teams that come back or teams that we think are more established. Remember the Mavericks last year blowing that series lead to the Clippers. The Jazz did it as well. The Mavericks were shooting unsustainable, and that was a big thing I identified last year. The Mavericks were shooting like 50% from 3 for the first 3 games, and then they cooled off and lost that series. If you can sort of see stuff like that unfolding, you can make a lot of money and get some really, really nice value.
It's going to be interesting to see how some of the lines, especially in the series and games, how they shift after game 1s. Because a lot of, this, Kenny, a lot of times people overreact to game 1s. It could be on the betting side, prediction side, whatever it may be. You see a lot of overreaction there. But let's look at some of these matchups. Which of these first round matchups do you think is the best value, in terms of betting on that you've looked at right now? Where you're saying, hey, this is a good pick for somebody looking at one of these first round matchups.
For me, it's actually the Denver Nuggets at plus 210. And the reason is, over the last few years, despite the fact that we know Draymond Green to be a very, very solid defender, right? He's great. One of the things he has not been able to do with consistency is slow down opposing big men and really slow down big rebounders. Nikola Jokic, I think, could have a really nice night, in game 1 and have a really nice series against the Golden State Warriors. The other thing to consider is Steph Curry's probably going to be available for game 1, but we don't really know how good he's going to look. This Golden State team was losing some really tough games to lose down the stretch without Steph Curry. They were not the same. And I just think that there could be a really big discrepancy on the glass. There could be a really big discrepancy down low. Golden State's played great all year, but to make them minus 250 against a Denver team that's played pretty solid defense, I know they have their flaws, but they can get really hot from 3. They obviously have the MVP favorite here. I think that they certainly should be given a much better chance in this series. So that's actually one that I'm looking at here because Denver, they do show up in the playoffs. We know that, that great series against Portland last year. And like I said, this matchup down low, I think could get away from Golden State a little bit with Jokic.
Yeah, it could. That's one thing we talked about the other day on this show was that we think Jokic could dominate in that matchup for sure. So look at him for some player props as well, too. I think that's something people should look at. What's a first-round series that you would say, I don't know about this one, Dex. Maybe let's stay away from this. Is there a first-round series you're just not really feeling right now?
Well, I honestly don't love that Raptors-Sixers series for the reason I said, because everyone in the world is saying, "Oh, the Raptors are going to upset the Sixers," and Doc Rivers is a guy that is not a great coach. We don't really know how he's going to react if Nick Nurse throws a lot at him in Game 1. So I don't really love betting on that series. Also, Celtics-Nets. The Celtics are favored right now at -130. I think the Celtics would go ahead and win the finals. I also think the Celtics could lose in 5 games to the Nets, right? We know that the Nets can get really, really hot. So this one is a really difficult one to call. I don't think I have any interest in maybe game by game, seeing how things start off. But in terms of betting series props or series lines, I would definitely not bet on Celtics-Nets.
I've been a little bit drawn into the Raptors one, Kenny, but I'm with you on the Nets. That's one I'm just like, that could go either way. I'd stay away. I picked Nets in 7, but as far as putting some money down on that, yeah, I might stay away on that. What about, I don't know if this is Denver for you, but what do you have as a likely underdog to win a first-round series? Is it Denver? I mean, you said you're out on the Raptors. Is it Dallas? They've been getting some pretty good odds. I've seen them as high as +250. Who do you like in terms of an underdog to win one of these first-round series?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am looking at Denver, and especially Denver in Game 1. I think getting 6.5 points is really delectable, and I think they could win that game. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I have to say my Clippers. I've been saying the Clippers are an underdog for 3 months now, assuming that Paul George is going to come back. Look, I don't know if they can win this series against the Phoenix Suns, but if you can go ahead and get a series spread on them, if indeed they do win they have to win the play-in game. Let's get that out of the way. They have to beat the Pelicans, but assuming they beat the Pelicans, they're now 4-point favorites to do that. I think that they could certainly put a little bit of a charge in the Suns. The Suns have been pretty much unbeatable. The Clippers have played them well this year. Paul George, if you remember last year, there really hasn't been too much roster turnover for both teams. They're pretty similar teams, and the Suns were just as good back then. And the Clippers probably should have won that series in the Western Conference Finals against them. They almost took Game 1 in a shock on the road. They came all the way back, cut it to like 5 points really late in that game. And obviously they had that game. I think it was Game 4, Game 5, where they had like a 4-minute scoreless stretch and really had every opportunity to win. So I think the Clippers played a really good series with the Suns last year. And I just feel like, given that history, and who knows, maybe Kawhi Leonard decides he just wants to play basketball again. Who knows what could happen in that series. But yeah, I'd be interested to see that series line, because I think they'll probably put the Clippers out at like +400 to win that series. And if you could get like a +2.5 games to get the Clippers to win 2 games in that series, I'd really, really like that. So that's the one underdog I'd be looking at we didn't talk about.
I like that, actually. If you can get Clippers to win +2 games in that series, that might be some good value for you there. And if Kawhi comes back, watch. I mean, that changes everything.
It really feels like he could just at any moment just be like, I'm coming back. I mean, look, I think that we get too caught up in being too cautious with medical things now when we're in the media. But it was a partial tear of his ligament. It wasn't like it was an injury that we normally see athletes take like years to recover from, and it was a year ago. So who knows? He's been practicing, he's been shooting, and it really just feels like maybe they're kind of keeping it quiet. And if the moment's right, he'll come back. And obviously, who knows how good he'll be when he come back. But Paul George came back. He scored 30 points in his first game. So you never really know.
That's good. And Paul George was fantastic the other night and lost to the Timberwolves. So, yeah, we'll see on that. In terms of player and team props in the first round, what are some that you would keep your eye on here? You talked about Jokic. You and I both agree he could be pretty dominant in that series. Maybe you want to look at him getting triple-double value. I think that depends on a lot of how the players play around him. But are there any other player or team props you're keeping an eye on for this first round?
Yeah, honestly, I've been looking a lot at this Grizzlies-Timberwolves series because it's going to be really fun. And, here's one thing we were just talking about with the public, right? You have to really gauge where the value is. The public loves Anthony Edwards right now. And what's not to love, right? The guy plays really exciting basketball. He throws down insane dunks. His points per game prop right now in round 1 is over under 23 points per game he's going to average. I really like that under. I think that this is a little bit inflated given what we saw in the playing game. Karl-Anthony Towns does have the tendency to get into foul trouble, but assuming he stays on the court, he's going to be commanding a lot of the ball. D'Angelo Russell, we saw him command a lot of the ball, and Patrick Beverley as well. Like, there's a lot of mouths to feed. And also, the Grizzlies have played some pretty good perimeter defense this year. I think that Anthony Edwards under 23 points is actually a pretty good look. That is an astronomical number to hang on him. And here's the thing about Anthony Edwards. He's had some really great games this year. He had that night where he hit 10 threes. He's also gone missing for a lot of the season. Like, he's had some pretty terrible shooting nights. And all you really need is one bad shooting night from Anthony Edwards in this series, and I think you cash the under 23 points. I just don't know how he does enough to average more than that. So I think that's a number I was really looking at. Maybe also the James Harden under 21.5 points as well. I think that's another one where he's been doing so much passing, and I think there's the expectation here with this number that in the playoffs he's going to shoot more. I mean, he's been a big distributor for them. That's the reason that they have been able to win games with him, is because of his passing. He's racked up double-digit assists, so I think that's a little bit high as well. I think you want to take those big names. You want to see if that number sort of makes sense. And I think in these scenarios, I think there's a decent amount of value on the unders.
Yes, I think there's good value there on the unders. I'm with you on Anthony Edwards. You're asking a lot of him to get 24 more points per game, averaging for a series in his first playoff series. That's another thing we should mention. Yeah. And Harden, I'm glad you mentioned that too. I could see how that number is tantalizing for a lot of people because of what he's done in the past, but he has not looked good, as you know, Kenny. He has not looked good recently, and he's done a lot more distributing, which you're 100% right about. So I like those. Those are two good ones. All right, so we'll see on that. What's the best bet for a road team to get a victory in Game 1? Everybody will have their eyes on these Game 1 matchups this weekend. What's a road team that you think could come and get that upset? And you like them either to take them with the money line or the points. What's the team you're looking at in terms of that?
Yeah, so I think that really we only have a few options here. We talked about how the Nuggets could definitely win this one. I'm going to go back to the Toronto Raptors because we haven't talked about this matchup a lot. I just think anytime you can get the better coach at plus 160, I think you just have to do it. And Nick Nurse is a better coach than Doc Rivers at this point in both of their careers. And I don't know if Doc Rivers is really going to have a game plan for what Nick Nurse does on defense against. He's going to have to make adjustments in this series. Because I expect the Toronto Raptors, with their length and the ability to play defense, they played some great defense. They've also shot very well. He's really going to have to go to work here to figure out how to solve this problem. And I don't know if he's going to have the goods, at least in Game 1, to adjust mid-game. Maybe we see the Sixers come out with a different approach in Game 2. But I think the Raptors come in and hit Philly in the mouth. They just have not been playing very good basketball over the last month or so. And this is a Raptors team, again, that just has the guard play. They have the shooting, and they play really good defense. They have really good length. They could definitely bother the Sixers because, aside from Joel Embiid, there's not a ton that has gone right for this team. Getting rid of Seth Curry has actually proven to be sort of a rough spot because they, obviously Danny Green, they employ him, but the shooting has been pretty brutal aside from him. And even Danny Green's really played off the bench, right? So it's, if there's not going to be a lot of threes falling for Philly, it's going to start to be a slow-paced game, and I think that really favors the Raptors. So I think they get this Game 1 win.
Raptors Game 1 win. That'll be interesting to see how that even affects the line for the series after that. That'll be very interesting there. All right, let's talk about some of these playing games tonight, Kenny, because we still got some games before we get to the playoffs. Okay, so the Hawks and the Cavs, all right? You'll see a little variation in the lines across the major sports books, right? I've seen -1, -2, -1.5. I've seen a little bit of variation in this. What do you like this game? I usually think when it's 3 points or below, take whichever team you think is going to win and go with the money line there.
Right.
What do you think about betting on this one? Do you like the Hawks or like the Cavs?
I like the Hawks here. I know that I've started to see some people say there's a little bit of value on Cleveland with the 2 points at home, but Atlanta here's the thing about Cleveland. First of all, I know I just said Atlanta. Cleveland has not played defense for, 2 months now, and I think that really kind of coincides with the Jared Allen injury. But it really should be noted that this team we think about the Cleveland Cavaliers as a very good defensive team because that's who they were for most of the season. But over the last 2 months, that's not been the case. Now, I'm also a little concerned if I am a Hawks bettor at this Jared Allen news. I just mentioned that Allen obviously is a guy that is, we should be fearing if he's going to be out, this Cavaliers defense is going to crumble. I mean, he is questionable for this game. If he does indeed play, I do feel like there is a little bit of value on the Cavaliers. But so I'm going to kind of wait to see what happens with that status. And I think the Cavaliers as 2-point underdogs could be a little bit interesting. But if there's no Jared Allen in this game, I think that my mind is made up here. I'm definitely taking Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one too. Now in the other game, Pelicans Clippers. The consensus on this one pretty much is Clippers is 4-point favorites. That's what you're pretty much seeing here across the board. You like the Clippers to possibly even upset the Suns. So I'm assuming you like the Clippers here against the Pelicans, right, Kenny?
Well, I did until literally 4 minutes ago. The reason I'm looking over my screen is because Paul George.
We got updated information.
Yeah,
Oh no.
Paul George is in health and safety protocols, and that he's not going to play in tonight's game. So that sort of throws a wrench in things. I do think that the Clippers are. I actually kind of like the Clippers more now because I know that we're going to get the Clippers at probably plus money at this point. You know, given how good New Orleans looked against the Spurs, I think again overreaction here. The Spurs. They're not a very good basketball team. We all know this. So, you know, the Clippers had, you know, I think they were the 8th seed without Paul George before he came back, or the 9th seed in the West. They played really solid basketball without him. I do have some questions about how the offense flows. Like, I think that, you know, this offense, everyone's more comfortable in this offense with Paul George there because he takes so much of the scoring load, and everyone kind of plays the roles that they need to. Reggie Jackson did not have a good playing game against the Timberwolves. Like, he's obviously going to need to be one of the stars on offense for them. But it's certainly possible that they could win this game. I also just the reason I liked the Clippers to start with is because they can play small ball, and the Pelicans what the Pelicans want is teams that like to play inside because that's how they can win. They can keep Jonas Valanciunas out there. He's going to rack up rebounds, one of the best rebounding teams in the league. He's going to score down low. The Clippers are going to go small with Robert Covington at the 5, and I don't know if New Orleans has an answer for that. I know that obviously now you don't have Paul George on the wing, but if Luke Kennard can come back for this game, you know, maybe there's a little bit there. There's a little bit of credence to taking the Clippers. I think we'll be exposed to the Clippers if they're underdogs here once the line gets posted. And I would say that Paul George is probably worth around 4 points. So I would say that this is now going to probably turn into a pick'em, or maybe even the Clippers are underdogs here. That'd be interesting for me.
Right now, I'm seeing it as a pick'em right now, but I think that could be probably, you're right, could move even more, and we can see the Clippers as underdogs. So that's really interesting. Thank you for the breaking news on this.
Yeah, there we go. You never know what's going to happen.
But see, that's also why we talk about, Kenny, when you're doing the betting, you have to pay attention to all the information, even up to the last minute. You got to pay attention to information. Anything can change. So you got to keep your eye on that. Okay, can we talk some futures bets?
Sure.
Because, you know, people are still trying to get in on some of these. Coach of the Year, MVP, Most Improved Player, Defensive Player of the Year, any of those awards, do you still think there's good value if you're getting it now, or should you have got in on this a while ago?
Yeah, the thing about this is there really is not a lot of value in taking it this late in the season, especially when you look at the fact that, you know, you look at the MVP market, the favorite is minus 365. That's Nikola Jokic. And the reason is because you sort of get a feel for how things are going to go. The voters are already made up their mind. We saw the ESPN straw poll, which said Nikola Jokic was the MVP. So you would kind of be a little it would kind of not be a smart decision to bet on Joel Embiid at this point, given the fact that a lot of the writers are leaning towards taking Nikola Jokic. I always like to say with these futures markets, it is a human award at the end of the day. Like there's a human element to the voting, and the voting is, you know, even though you're not supposed to take the postseason into account or late in the season, like there's recency bias, there's a lot that goes into it. And I just feel like, you know, Joel Embiid in the second half of the season, really since they got James Harden, he has not been quite the focal point of Philly as he was. And, you know, meanwhile, Nikola Jokic did really well to get Denver into the playoffs and avoid the play-in game. So I think that there's a lot working against Embiid at this point. And so I would tend to believe the odds that he is, you know, a plus 265 underdog to win this award. But if you want to have some fun here, maybe you take Giannis at plus 800. I don't think it's that far-fetched. If Jokic doesn't win the award, I don't think it's that far-fetched that Giannis actually winds up winning it again. He was that good this year, and I think he's getting a little bit of love from the writers. So we'll see.
We'll see. And that, any of the other awards you think or is it just kind of a wrap on everything? Is there any of these other awards that you think maybe you can get in and look at some of this action and maybe make something late? Because Most Improved might be kind of up in the air. Coach of the Year is a tough one too, right? Like Monty Williams should be the favorite.
Yeah, he's like minus 2,000 to win. So it's like I said,
it's over.
Yeah, I've taken Most Improved odds before at this point in the season just for fun, but I can tell you from experience, it is not usually fruitful because the favorites are indeed it's like betting on, you know, the Oscars when you have like a minus 500 favorite. Like there's a reason why, you know, why it's a favorite, because people know things. So I think that the awards are probably wrapped up. I like I said, I think the one that might fluctuate is MVP because that's the one that has the most impotence. So I think maybe there's like, people change their mind at the last minute, because it's a very important award. It's a big vote. But I think in terms of stuff like Coach of the Year, Most Improved, we sort of know what's going to happen there.
Yeah, it's probably a wrap on those. When we look at the odds for the NBA championship, right, that's one that people still are inclined to bet on right before the playoffs, during the playoffs. There still can be a lot of fluctuation in that. How do you look at that in terms of approaching that? What is a team with the best value? You'll still see like the Nets, you can get them at plus 900. The Warriors plus 800. Are there any of those teams around there that maybe have the fourth or fifth best odds that you think you should maybe throw some dollars down on?
Yeah, I think, really what you said with the MVP award, right, is like it's not really worth it anymore to take, the guys that are the favorites, or even like, the Suns, right? You probably should have taken the Suns before the season, or, a month into the season, whatever. At this point, there's really not a ton of value. It's all been exhausted on the Phoenix Suns. I think if you're going to look for a futures bet, I'm thinking about the Celtics at plus 850. I really do like this team quite a bit. I think they were the best team in the East, for a month there until Robert Williams got hurt. And then even then, when he got hurt and they took out, Al Horford, Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum, the rest of those guys, they still almost won a bunch of games. They played really well without them. So I think that, the Celtics could certainly make some noise here. And I think really what you're looking at with the futures bet, in the East is like, okay, well, can this team, really in general, is this team going to get to the finals? And then you probably have a chance to hedge against them. And I think the Celtics can definitely get to the finals. The East is I don't know if the East is going to be as predictable as people might think it might be. I think the Celtics can beat a lot of teams. And again, like I said, Robert Williams is there's whispers that he's going to come back for the playoffs. The injury wasn't supposed to be that long-term of injury to begin with, so it makes sense. And they have the scoring, they have the defense, and I think that this has been one of the best teams in the NBA all year, and I have a lot of confidence that they're gonna win this series against the Nets. Again, like I said, I don't want to lay minus 130 on them to win that series, but I certainly think if they can get through that series, they're probably the favorites to win the East in my eyes. I have not seen the consistency that I wanted to see from the Bucks this year. And I think that they're a little bit overvalued a little bit by the public.
Some people are going to say, Kenny, in terms of the NBA championship odds, they're going to say, well, you still got to believe in the Nets. They still got KD. They still got Kyrie.
Sure.
You're like me. You sound a little bit like me where you're skeptical on that. And I wonder if it's because of the defense. Do you think the Nets are a good value at all for anybody looking to bet on a team to win the NBA championship?
Well, yeah, I would say the defense, but I also would say that the Nets, they don't have the depth that a lot of these other teams do. And that is really what matters in the playoffs. And I think that with, Durant and Irving, you're going to win a few games in this series. There's no doubt about that. But to last for an entire best of 7 series, you're going to need a bench. You're going to need, tertiary scorers. And that's not something that the Brooklyn Nets really have. And it's not necessarily Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving's fault. It's really the fault of James Harden, right? I mean, they had to give up all these guys to get James Harden, didn't really get much in return. Now you're really relying a lot on rookies. We were just talking about, is Anthony Edwards in his first playoff series going to average all these, it didn't Kessler Edwards and Cam Thomas and these guys are going to be able to carry the Nets second unit? I don't know. Goran Dragic, I mean, he's getting old. We don't know. He's not certainly going to be the guy that he was 4 years ago. I just think there's a lot of question marks with this team. You obviously have the potential here for KD and Kyrie to drop like 100 points, but by themselves. But I think short of that, it's going to be really difficult for them to navigate an entire playoffs. It's just going to be too much to ask, I think. And this is a team that when KD and Kyrie got here, it was a team that had plenty of young players. They had Jared Allen, they had Karis LeVert, they had Spencer Dinwiddie, they had all these guys. They had a culture, and all those guys are gone now. It's new guys, and I don't know if these role players for the Nets are ready to step in and win a finals, help KD and Kyrie win a finals, at least win a playoff series. And I also think you're going to see that the Nets really miss Joe Harris in this series as well. I think you need that shooting, and Seth Curry's been great, but. And frankly, Patty Mills as well. But I think that they're a few players short of being good enough to make a big run. But we'll see. It's never really sustainable to have just an offense relying on 2 guys.
Yeah, no, I'd happen to agree with that. And some people will also say, well, Ben Simmons might come back, and we'll see what happens with that. I think there's a lot of ifs. Let's put it like that, right, Kenny? There's a lot of ifs around the Nets. The last thing before we get out of here, when you're betting on the NBA in the playoffs, is it more challenging as teams advance to bet on these teams to win series because the competition generally gets better, the defenses are better? Do you find it more challenging as we get into deeper rounds in the NBA to bet on these teams?
Well, it's always more challenging to bet on to bet against teams that you bet on, or fade a team that just won a series, right? Like and that is one of the tricky parts. The other tricky part is if you identify, hey, the Toronto Raptors, I think they're going to make some noise. They're going to upset the Sixers. If you bet on the Raptors now, they win this series. Next series, they're maybe going to be favorites, or they're maybe not going to be as much value on them, right? So you're sort of going to kick yourself like, oh, well, should I have taken them to win the East? And it can always be a little tricky in that scenario. So that is, those are the problems that I would say would arise. But in terms of, just betting series to series, I think you just see what it opens up at. If you like it, you take it. If you don't, you pass, and you see how the series develops. I wouldn't necessarily say it gets so much harder. I think emotionally it can get harder though for someone to who has maybe an emotional attachment to a team that they're riding as an underdog to fade them the next round. But that's what you do in betting. Especially what I do every day with tennis. You bet on one guy, he wins, and then you fade him the next round. Like that's how betting goes. You can't have loyalty or emotional attachments here. You just bet on numbers, and whichever ones look better to you, that's what you take.
That's what you got to do. No emotional attachment there. Kenny, it's going to be interesting first weekend of the NBA playoffs. We'll see how all this stuff plays out. Thank you for the update on Paul George. That is going to be interesting.
Welcome, yeah.
See how that plays out tonight. That is Kenny Ducey. You can catch him on the Boardroom, also the Action Network, and NBC Sports Edge. He's one of the best people to talk about in terms of betting. Kenny, thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate you, man. We'll have to have you back on later throughout the playoffs. We'll definitely have to have you back on.
I'm very excited. Yeah, I would love to do that. It's great to talk to you as always, Dexter, and good luck with the rest of the day.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, that is Kenny Ducey. Please go follow him. Check out all of his work. That is it for this episode of the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast. That Ain't Hard to Tell podcast, that's the wrong show. The NBA Exchange that we're on. That is my other podcast, which Kenny has been on.
I've been, yeah.
That is it. We are going to be off next week because I'm out of town. We will not be here next week, but we will return the following week. So we'll have a lot to talk about, probably some series starting in the second round of the playoffs. I'm Dexter Henry. That is Kenny Ducey. Until next time, y'all.